Three IRA died: Con Daly, Peter Moynihan and Ger O'Leary. They are buried side by side in Bandon Cemetery. While the flying column were waiting for the ambush that morning, they heard distant gunfire. The encircling British forces had come across the Ford House in the nearby townland of Ballymurphy, where Charlie Hurley, officer in command, 3rd West Cork Brigade, was recovering from wounds received at Upton ambush. Charlie died in a hail of bullets while trying to fight his way out. Only one gable remains of the Ford House today, where Charlie died. However, a fine monument has been built to his memory nearby. In 1906, Michael Collins' brother Johnny, who was farming at Woodfield, married Catherine Hurley from Drina. They had 8 children. The last, Liam, was born in 1920. Catherine Hurley died in February 1921, leaving Johnny to look after the children. On April 7th, Johnny went to a county council meeting in Cork City on the train and was arrested by the British on his return journey. The housekeeper Peggy O'Donovan was looking after the children that day at Woodfield when a patrol of Essex Regiment soldiers came in their lorries with some of the Collins neighbours as prisoners. They forced the neighbours to burn the Collins home and farm buildings. Michael Collins' nephews and nieces now had no mother, their father was in jail and their family home was burned. They suffered a lot of hardship at that time. Two Lord Mayors of Cork died during the War of Independence, and they are buried side by side in St Finbarr's Cemetery, Cork. Thomas McCurtain was shot by police in his home at 40 Thomas Davis Street on March 20, 1920. Terence MacSweeney, who took over as Lord Mayor after the death of Thomas McCurtain, died in England in Brixton Prison after a 74-day hunger strike on October 25, 1920. The truce was agreed, which ended the War of Independence on July 11, 1921, and on the 22nd of August Tom Barry was married in Dublin. This photograph shows the wedding party at the back of Vaughan's Hotel. It was exactly a year to the day before Michael Collins was shot. Eamon de Valera, president of the Dáil, is seen sitting between the bride and groom. Michael Collins is hardly noticeable in the back row with his head down because he suspected the photographer was a British spy. It's a sad photograph because the group, the who's who of the volunteers and IRA, were in buoyant mood that day. A few months later they would be split because of the treaty. Within a little over a year, some of them would be dead, killed in the Civil War, including Michael Collins. The lady in Michael Collins' life at this time was Kitty Kiernan. She came from Granard, County Longford. The Kiernans owned a hardware store, an undertaking business and the Greville Arms Hotel in Granard. Kitty and Michael met first in 1917 and were engaged to be married in early March 1922. In October 1921, against his will and under pressure from some of his friends, Michael Collins went to London with the rest of the Irish delegation to negotiate with the British. The Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed in No. 10 Downing Street in the early hours of December 6, 1921. After signing the document, Lord Birkenhead, a British politician, said, "I have just signed my political death warrant." Michael Collins looked up and said, "I have signed my actual death warrant." When the treaty was brought back to the Dáil, there was an immediate split, with Eamon de Valera leading the anti-treaty side and Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith heading the pro-treaty side. The treaty debates began and continued until January 1922. The bitterness of the treaty debates is highlighted in this letter from Michael Collins to Kitty Kiernan in January 1922.
My own Kitty. Just one or two lines. This is the worst day I've had yet. Far, far the worst. May God help us all. I got no letter from you. I wonder why. In awful haste, my fondest love me all.
Michael Collins was invited to Granard, County Longford by Kitty Kiernan for the Christmas of 1921. But he declined that offer and instead he came back to Clonakilty. But of course he couldn't have had his dinner here because this was a burdened shell, this house, at that time. So he actually had his dinner in his cousin's place next door, Annie Collins' house, the yellow building just to our west. And there is a story as well that on that day, while the goose was cooking for the Christmas dinner, Michael Collins and his brother Johnny and other family members went to the hill across the way over here. That is called Cunnock and there is a part of that hill called Carrigar Royrk, which means the Rock of the View. We are standing here on a beautiful summer's day on the hill of Cunnock across the valley from Woodfield, where Michael Collins was born. The rock outcrop behind us here is known as Carrigar Royrk, the Rock of the View. And Michael Collins stood here on Christmas Day 1921, a few weeks after he signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty. He stood here with his brother Johnny, who had just been released from prison. With me here is Sonny O'Leary, who owns this land. Sonny, what do you know about that day, about that Christmas Day when Michael Collins came here in 1921?
What I know is what my grandaunt told me, who was Johnny Collins' second wife, was that on the they spent the whole afternoon of that Christmas Day up here, sitting on this rock, and Michael Collins' comment was that he never before saw so much of his country in such a short time as he did on that day.
Sonny O'Leary, could you just tell us what we're actually looking at here today?
Yeah, away to the right you can see the Stags Rocks, which is just off Towhead, where the Kowloon Bridge went down a few years ago. You can actually see the lights of the Fastnet Rock at night time, shiny in the distance there. Coming on back, you can see Rosscarbery town. They're set into the hillside. Coming further to the left onto Onahincha, and further on to the left again to the Galley Head with the Dolig Rock just to the right of it. Over along Arfields headlands, coming back to the Lissavard village where Michael Collins went to school. The bay in the far distance then is Clonakilty Bay, and coming back inland again to Sam's Cross, with a view right across the landscape to Balnascarty Mountain as far as the eye can see.
A vote was taken on the treaty in the Dáil on the 7th of January, and it was passed by a margin of 64 to 57 votes. Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith over the following months led a new provisional Irish government, and the British began to leave Southern Ireland. Some anti-treaty IRA took over the Four Courts building in Dublin on April 13, 1922, in defiance of the new Irish government. A general election was held in the 26 counties on June 16, 1922, and it was to be decided by the Irish people whether they wanted the treaty or not. Michael Collins visited the burned ruins of his family home on the 15th of June, the day before the election, and also made an election speech outside of O'Donovan's Hotel in Clonakilty. The result of the election was that the pro-treaty parties won 92 seats as against 36 on the anti-treaty side. After the result of the election became known, the British put pressure on Michael Collins to do something about the anti-treaty IRA in the forecourts. Collins ordered a shelling of the forecourts on the 28th of June 1922, and this marked the beginning of the Irish Civil War. Heavy fighting took place in Dublin at the beginning of the Civil War, and in July 1922 Michael Collins took over as Commander-in-Chief of the pro-treaty National Army. He wrote this sad letter to Kitty Kiernan on August 2nd, after the shooting dead of Harry Boland, his former friend, who had taken the anti-treaty side in the Civil War.
My own dearest Kitty, I was glad to get your letter today. It was not possible for me to write to you yesterday, so I sent a wire this morning, and it was before I got your letter too. I mentioned about Harry in yesterday's letter. Last night I passed Vincent's hospital and a small crowd gathered outside. My mind went into him lying dead there, and I thought of the times together. And whatever good there is in it, any wish of mine, he certainly had it. Although the gap of 8 or 9 months was not forgotten. Of course, no one can ever forget it. I only thought of him with the friendship of the days of 1918 and 1919. To tell me that the last thing he said to his sister Kathleen before he was operated on was, "Have they got me Collins yet?" I don't believe it so far as I'm concerned, and if he did say it, there's no necessity to believe it. I'd send a wreath, but I suppose they'd return it torn up. Please do come up as soon as you can. You'll excuse this letter. May God bless you. Fondest love, Michael.
By August 1922, the National Army pushed the anti-treaty IRA into the territory south of a line from Waterford to Limerick, and national troops were also landed off of ships in ports along the south coast. On August the 20th, Michael Collins decided to come south on a tour of inspection. He arrived in a military convoy at the Imperial Hotel in the South Mall, Cork City, on the evening of August the 21st, and he stayed in the hotel that night. He left the Imperial Hotel on the morning of August the 22nd at 6:15 on a tour of West Cork. The convoy's first stop was Macroom Barracks, where Michael had a meeting with local army commanders. The next town on their tour was Bandon, and the normal route between Macroom and Bandon was the main road through Crookstown. However, this road was blocked with felled trees, blown bridges and trenched roads, so the convoy was forced to take an unusual route which took them through a 5 crossroads called Bale na Blá. A man called Dennis Long, who was standing outside Long's public house, now the Diamond Bar, at the crossroads, gave the convoy directions onto the Bandon Road. What Collins and his convoy didn't realise was that this man was an anti-treaty sentry, and many prominent anti-treaty leaders were having meetings in the Bale na Blá area that day. Dennis Long reported back to his officers that Michael Collins' convoy had passed through, and a decision was taken to set up an ambush for the convoy on its return journey in the evening. Up to 40 anti-treaty IRA took up firing positions at a spot a half-mile along the Bandon Road from the crossroads at Bale na Blá. Mines were placed under the road, and the road was blocked with a brewery cart. The position is a classic ambush site, with the main road running in a series of bends between high ground to the south and north. On the southern hill, a narrow road, sometimes known as the Horseshoe Boreen, runs parallel to the main road, and other roads lead off of it to the south. They provided ideal escape routes if something went wrong for the ambush party. In the meantime, Collins and his convoy travelled to Bandon, on to Clonakilty where they stopped for lunch, and then there were stops in Rosscarbery and Skibbereen. Skibbereen was the furthest west the convoy travelled that day, and this photograph shows Michael Collins getting into his car outside the Eldon Hotel in the town. On the return journey to Cork, the convoy stopped off at Sam's Cross, close to where Collins was born. He called into his cousins, the O'Brien's house, where he met his brother Johnny, cousins and neighbours, as it turned out for the last time. One man who met Michael Collins that evening was his first cousin, Michael O'Brien. It was he who summoned Johnny Collins up from Woodfield to meet Michael. His son, Jimmy O'Brien, told us about that meeting. Did they know that Michael was coming here, was going to pay a visit?
They did, because it's from Woodfield. They were over from Woodfield. They were Heath O'Brien, and they were there. They were all at the gathering there, and they were waiting till he come.
And what time of the day was it?
It was roughly around, going on for 5 o'clock, I'd say, if it wasn't a bit before it. Sometime around that, like, roughly.
And Michael, and the convoy was coming in from the west, the armoured car actually parked outside of this house.
It was parked right outside the gate. The armoured car was parked right outside the gate.
Michael came in here first, and he was your father went to get his brother down at Woodfield.
Yeah, my father went in to get Johnny, the brother, down in the farm, the home place. And when the father went down for him, when they were coming back, the father and Johnny, the brother, Michael got up from the table. He see him passing the window, and he went out to the door to meet him. And the armoured car hood was back, and Johnny said to the Michael, the first thing he said was, if you want to put up the hood in the armoured car, you'll be dead before the sun sinks to the west. And he said, not at all. He said, they won't ever shoot me in my own county. So that was it. And they came in there and they were talking, and then they had a word private, the two of them, and that was exactly the way it was now.
What kind of form was Michael Collins in that
day? He was fine, everything fine, but that he had a terrible cold. He had a terrible cold, and but other than that, he was super.
At the time the convoy was leaving Sam's Cross that evening at around 6 o'clock, the men at the ambush site at Bailnablaw were getting tired of waiting, and most of them decided to leave. 6 remained in the little valley to clear the road. 4 worked removing the mines, rolling up the wires and taking away the barricade, and 2 stayed up on the southern hill as lookouts. The convoy passed through Clonakilty again, and then on to Bandon. Collins had a meeting in Lee's Hotel, now the Munster Arms in Bandon, with his friend and local army commander, Sean Hales. A statue of Sean Hales now stands in front of the post office in Bandon. While that meeting was going on, one of the 6 men clearing the road at Bailnablaw on the anti-treaty side was Tom Hales, brother of Sean. The Hales family split was one of the saddest examples of the division after the treaty. The family were deeply involved in the Volunteers and IRA even before 1916, and both Sean and Tom were active during the War of Independence. Tom was tortured in 1920 by the British in Bandon military barracks, and this photograph shows him on the left with Pat Hart from Clonakilty during their interrogation. The last photograph of Michael Collins alive shows him on the left in the back of his Leyland car as it pulled away from outside Lee's Hotel in Bandon after his meeting with Sean Hales. At 7:45, the two lookouts on the southern hill at Bairn-le-Blas heard lorries coming from the Bandon side. It was Collins' convoy. They fired warning shots to alert their comrades clearing the road of the oncoming danger, and these men got off the road quickly onto the southern hill. We will visit the ambush trail at the Michael Collins Centre to explain what happened next. The day Michael Collins was shot at Bairn-le-Blas, he was travelling in a military convoy. They were coming from a tour of West Cork, heading back to his headquarters in Cork City. And at a place called Bairn-le-Blas, they became involved in an ambush. Now that day that Michael Collins was travelling in this convoy, there was actually 4 vehicles in the convoy. In the front there was an army scout on a motorbike. Then there was a vehicle like this. It was a Crosley Tender, which was a troop lorry. Now these vehicles were made in Manchester by the Crosley Motor Company, and they could hold 11 soldiers, 4 down each side at the back and 3 across the front. Now after that then was Michael Collins' car, and that was the Leyland 8. Now we haven't got a replica of that here. These were very luxurious cars, and they were sometimes known as the Leyland Thomas because they were designed by a famous Welshman called John Godfrey Parry Thomas. And Michael Collins' car was one of these. There were 2 drivers in the front of the car who took it in turns, and Michael Collins sat in the back with Emmett Dalton. Now at the very back then of the convoy was a Rolls-Royce Whippet armoured car, like the replica that we have here. That was armed with a Vickers machine gun, and it was at the very back of Michael Collins' convoy. When they drove into the ambush site that day, they discovered that there was a horse cart like this blocking the road. And Emmett Dalton, who was sitting alongside of Michael Collins in his car, shouted to the driver of the car to drive like hell. In other words, that they should move the cart and keep going. But Michael Collins said no. He said stop and we'll fight them. So all of the soldiers and all of the vehicles in the convoy got themselves out very quickly and threw themselves up against the ditch on the southern side of the road, and they began to return fire at the men up on the hill to the south, the anti-treaty IRA, who at this stage were firing down onto Michael Collins' convoy. When the shooting started at Bairn-le-Blas, Michael Collins got out of his Leyland car and he threw himself up against the ditch on the southern side of the road and started firing at the men, the anti-treaty IRA, who were up on the hillside to the south. The armoured car, which was at the back of the convoy, that also started firing its Vickers machine gun up onto the hillside as well. And while the machine gun was firing, there was very little return fire down onto the convoy from the hill, because the force of that machine gun was something fierce. It was cutting the bushes and the grass and everything in its path on the hillside. But then, for some reason, the gun in the armoured car, the machine gun, jammed, and it could only fire individual shots like a rifle. And Michael Collins could see when that happened that the men on the hillside began to run off. So he got up from the cover of the ditch where he was firing his rifle. He ran to the back of the armoured car. Using the armoured car for cover, he fired a few shots up onto the hillside, and he saw that the men were still running off away along the Horseshoe Boreen. So the next move that he made was fatal from his point of view, because he walked back into the road like this to get a better view, and he was firing his rifle up onto the hillside, and suddenly there was a bullet hit him in the front of the head, and it went right through and out the back, and he fell down on top of his rifle on the road. And when some of his soldiers, Emmett Dalton and Sean O'Connell, came around to see where he was from in front of the armoured car, they discovered Michael Collins lying down on the road with his rifle clutched and his head resting on the weapon. They could see that he had a terrible head wound, so they pulled him from where he was, dragged him across the road under the back of the armoured car for cover. Emmett Dalton began to bandage Michael Collins' head, and Sean O'Connell had Michael Collins' hand caught and he was whispering an act of contrition into his ear. Sean O'Connell said afterwards that he thought he felt a little faint squeeze in reply, but Michael Collins died very quickly on the road that day at Bellnablaw. Soon after Michael Collins' death, just after 8 o'clock on Tuesday, August the 22nd, 1922, the gunfire petered out at Bellnablaw, and his body was taken back to Cork City, where it was laid out in Shanakeel Hospital. On Wednesday evening, his remains were taken back to Dublin on a ship called the Classic. This photograph shows Johnny Collins looking into his brother's coffin during the lying in state in Dublin City Hall. Michael Collins' burial took place the following Monday in Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin, after a huge military funeral. He was aged 31 years and 10 months. In 1923, after the Civil War, because of the burning of Woodfield and also a severe hand injury, Johnny Collins decided to sell the family farm and yard. He moved to Dublin with his 8 children to take up a position in the Land Commission, part of the new Irish Civil Service. In Dublin, he married Nancy O'Brien, his second cousin, who had worked as an agent for Michael Collins. The couple had 2 children, and they are pictured here in the 1930s with their family, including the 8 children from Johnny's first marriage. In the 1950s, when Johnny retired, he and Nancy decided to come back to Clonakilty to live, and they are both buried in St. Mary's Cemetery just outside of the town. The old yard at Woodfield by the 1980s had become derelict and overgrown. Liam Collins, son of Johnny, bought the outside section of the property and later the inner part, which contained the birthplace of his famous uncle, was donated to Liam by the Coakley family next door. Liam began the restoration of the site in 1989, and a large crowd attended the official opening by President of Ireland Patrick Hillery in October 1990. The birthplace is now open to the public. In 1997, Micheál Collins, speaking at Bellnablaw, paid tribute to his brother Liam, who died in March of that year.
Many may move on from here to Woodfield. Ladies and gentlemen, when you go there, think of how fortunate it is, through the wisdom and determination of my late brother Liam, that Woodfield stands the way it was the day it was burned. It has been roofed. The rubble, 250 tons of it were removed. Care, love, attention were given by local people, irrespective of creed or politics. And I say to you that that building today stands, paneless windows, doorless door openings. But it stands there where a young man grew up and was determined that the forelock tipping, the cap touching, the reminders of occupation all around him in local castles, etc. The type of housing that passed for housing, that he would end it.
John Collins, son of Patrick Collins, also paid tribute to his cousin Liam and his work.
My wife and I came over here in 1980, and we came here to Woodfield, and at that point, this building behind me was a pigsty. The local owner used it to house his hogs. And we came back again in 1992, 5 years ago, and we're just amazed at the wonderful monument that the Irish people and my cousin Liam and Michael had put together. It's a very, very humbling thing to be here and to be my father's representative a little while ago at Ballinabla.
One of the 6 anti-treaty IRA men from the original ambush party on the hillside the evening Michael Collins was shot at Ballinabla was Jim Hurley from Clonakilty. Jim and Johnny Collins were friends before the Civil War, and in the 1930s they made up their differences, and later Jim Hurley ended up being buried alongside Johnny Collins in Clonakilty. Micheál Collins outlines how this symbol of Civil War reconciliation came about.
In 1965, on January the 30th, my father died. And Jim, who had been unwell, got the verdict from the specialist in Cork that he had cancer of a most grievous type, and the maximum period he had to live would be 10 days to 3 weeks. Jim could not attend Johnny's funeral. He found out, though, through his wife, that the grave next to my father had been bought some years ago. He then rang me to Waterford, where I was then and still am living. And he said, Michael, I want you to go meet Monsignor Barrett in Clonakilty, find out who owns that grave, and I want you to get that grave for me, because I want to be buried alongside Shafter. Shafter was the pet name they knew my father by. I want, he said, to lie beside him to indicate that 2 men could, while alive, end a difference and come to sleep their last sleep till the judgment day together. I said, Jim, I don't know who owns that grave. I don't know whether she'll be willing to accede to my request, or I don't even know will Monsignor Barrett tell me. By God, then he said, Michael, your father and I did a hell of a lot harder things like that. And when you've fixed that up, ring me back, he said, and get on with the job now, and put the phone down. I came down to Clonakilty, saw Monsignor Barrett, found who owned the grave, and went out to the woman who had bought the grave. She understood the position, and she said how touched she was that Jim, with the passage of years, recognised who the real achiever was. I got back to Cork, called in saw Jim, who was very close to death. And he said, I don't want any questions. I know damn well you've got the grave. That's what I asked you to do, and I'm grateful to you for it. And he put his hands around me, the hands of a man very few hours before his death. Michael, he said, you have made me as happy now as when your father greeted me 30 years ago almost in Dublin to put an end to a difference that broke my heart for every day it continued.
There are many monuments and busts commemorating Michael Collins around Ireland. This is the old Collins homestead at Woodfield, and alongside of me here is a very fine bust of Michael Collins by the sculptor Francis Doyle Jones, and the date underneath the shoulder reads 1921, because Michael Collins actually sat while he was alive for the sculptor when this bust was being made. At Sam's Cross there is a monument that was unveiled by Tom Barry, the Flying Column leader, at Easter 1965. The monument is a rough block of Wicklow granite on which a bronze plaque made by the Cork sculptor Seamus Murphy has been set. Tom Barry took the anti-treaty side during the Civil War, but he had great respect for Michael Collins and was delighted to unveil the monument at Sam's Cross. This bust of Michael Collins by Dick Joint is located in Merrion Gardens, Dublin, and it was unveiled in 1990. A superb large bust of the big fella, again by Seamus Murphy, is located in Fitzgerald Park in Cork City. The most recent monument dedicated to Michael Collins is the National Michael Collins Memorial Statue and is located at Emmett Square in Clonakilty. This statue depicts Michael Collins making a speech and is a piece by sculptor Kevin Holland. A week-long Michael Collins festival in 2002 ended on the 22nd of August at 8 p.m, the 80th anniversary of Michael Collins' death, with the unveiling ceremony. Film actor Liam Neeson, who played the big fella in the 1996 Neil Jordan film Michael Collins, travelled specially from New York to unveil the statue, and he was welcomed to the town by Mayor Anthony McDermott.
No problem. He paid dearly with his life at a very young age of just 30.
Earlier that day, Clonakilty Town Council organised a civic reception for Liam Neeson, and after a presentation by the mayor, the actor said a few words.
And I shall start my little speech. If you'll excuse me for reading it. Michael Collins was my hero. His energy, his capacity for work, his intelligence, his reverence, his irreverence, his undying loyalty to friends and comrades, above all his love for Ireland and the Irish people. What a guy. But for all his greatness, he was a big West Cork lad at heart. He'd be quick to engage you in a wrestling match or a long jump competition. The country lad was the building block for me when I played him in Neil Jordan's film Michael Collins. I wanted to show Michael Collins the man. It was a time for such a film because it was time to look back at that period of our shared history. The Celtic Tiger had arrived. There was a justified feeling of prosperity and certain wealth. We were becoming the envy of nations around the world. Ireland could hold its head up. Michael Collins would have been proud. Although the prices of houses in West Cork would have made him turn in his grave. I am deeply privileged to be with you today, to receive this honour, a great day to celebrate a great man. Thank you very much.
Seven and a half thousand people attended the unveiling ceremony, and the presence of a guard of honour from the Defence Forces and Sliabh na Món, Michael Collins' 1920 Rolls-Royce armoured car, added to the dignity of the occasion. One of the guest speakers that evening was Tim Pat Coogan, author of the book Michael Collins, A Biography.
Well, I come here with trepidation as a dub amongst West Corkonians. But I'm very heartened by the number of other foreign accents I heard. Northerners from all over the place have come here today. And I think they've come for the same reason. We're honouring one of our own. It's the same instinct that brought Liam over from America and that got my old teacher in Blackrock, Father Micheál O'Carroll, when I'd left the Irish Press, to send me a note one day saying, the best is left yet to come. The Collins family want a biography. It should be done. And actually I was thinking of doing one of Sean Lemass at the time, and I said, I'm very fond of Sean Lemass. Wished. Sean Lemass did an awful lot. He continued the work of Michael Collins, and without him we wouldn't be in the EEC and a lot of other things.
Finally, Master of Ceremonies Trealach Ó Dúnmhain introduced Liam Neeson to the crowd before the unveiling of the statue.
I'll hand you over to Mr. Liam Neeson.
Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. Oscar Wilde once wrote, "It is tragic how few people ever possess their souls before they die. Nothing is more rare in any man," says Emerson, "than an act of his own." Michael Collins was most definitely one of those few. From his early days as a boy here in Clonakilty until the day he died, he was always his own man. In these days of corporate shenanigans, where the buck is continuously being passed, in Collins' day, the buck seemed to stop with him. He is my hero. He still inspires me. 2 years ago, I was recovering from a near-fatal motorbike accident. Lying in a New York hospital bed, I often asked myself, what would Mick do? The answer was always the same. You were told to do 1 hour of physical therapy. You will do 2 and be thankful for it. Forgive me, I'm an actor. I had to do something. It worked, and because of Dr. Michael Collins, I'm able to stand before you today. I want to congratulate all of you who worked so hard to make this Michael Collins Celebration Week such a success. If my presence here in any way helps to keep alive his memory, then I am doubly honoured. To the National Michael Collins Memorial Project team, thank you. Thank you all.
And now it's my privilege and honour to invite Mr. Liam Neeson to officially unveil the National Michael Collins Memorial Statue.
All the famous men and women who were associated with Michael Collins' life and times are now dead, and their graves are scattered all over the country. The cross over Michael Collins' grave in Glasnevin Cemetery was placed there in the late 1930s. Across the path from Michael Collins' grave is the grave of his oldest sister, Margaret. Close by is the grave of Kitty Kiernan, Michael's fiancée, who after his death married an Irish Army officer, Felix Cronin. Also there are the graves of Harry Boland, Cathal Brua, Minister for Defence in the First Dáil, Thomas Ashe, friend of Michael Collins from County Kerry, and Arthur Griffith. Another great West Cork man, the Fenian Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa, is also buried there, and the resting place of Collins' great political rival, Eamon de Valera, is close by. The great Tom Barry, guerrilla leader, is buried with his wife Leslie Price in St Finbar Cemetery in Cork City. The great friend of Collins, Sean Hales, who himself was shot in Dublin on the 7th of December 1922, is buried in the family grave at Inishannon. His brother, Tom Hales, who fought on the other side in the Civil War, is buried in St Patrick's Cemetery in Bandon. Thousands of people visit Michael Collins' birthplace Woodfield, Béalnablaw and his grave in Glasnevin every year. People from Ireland and dozens of other countries around the world. The film Michael Collins has introduced him to millions of people who might never have heard of him only for it. For many, he is an icon and a symbol of freedom.